Next up, having confidence amidst conspiracy theories. And yes, I am going to address some conspiracy theories. I wasn't going to do it, but then I realised that not many people are doing it, and so why not? I'm sure a lot of you have been noticing of late that there's quite a lot in the coronavirus context, and we'll call them conspiracy theories because that's what they're labelled. Whether or not they are really conspiracy theories, I'm about to tell you. Firstly, did the virus originate in a lab, and was it deliberate? Secondly, is 5G technology spreading the virus? And thirdly, does Bill Gates have something to do with it? And who does he plan to vaccinate? Let me just quickly mention these three, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I actually want to get to the point. I think this is important and useful for everyone, the final point that I'm going to make in this. But firstly, the lab theory. We've all heard it. It came from a lab. It didn't come from the wet market in Wuhan. The first problem is this. The lab is actually over 30 kilometres away from the wet market. It's not over the road. It's not on the same city block. I've seen claims to that effect around the place. That's not accurate. Secondly, if you're inclined to think that it was deliberately released from a lab, just consider for a minute. That goes against every fibre in the communist DNA. Communism is very concerned, throughout history and all its applications, very concerned about losing face in the eyes of the world. Very concerned. In fact, that's the primary concern, and that's why they muck up so much of their crisis handling, because they're scared that word will get out. So they would never inflict it on Wuhan. If it was deliberate, they would have sent the virus overseas. You can believe you me, and they wouldn't have started it in their own backyard and dealt with the stigma and the shame of all of that. So the question is, could it have happened that way? Well, look, sure, it could have, but only because it's not impossible. And I know Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, mentioned it, but he's backing down from the situation. So clearly there's not a whole lot of evidence there. But if it did happen, it could, right? So if it did happen that way, then I'd put my money on it was an accident, not a conspiracy. So it doesn't change things that much. Secondly, the 5G theory. This is weird, to be honest. I'm sorry if you're persuaded by this, but it's weird. This is the notion that coronavirus is spreading in lockstep with the rollout of 5G. Firstly, that's not correct. I looked at the maps of the coronavirus spread and the 5G spread. It's not really a correlation, other than the fact that population centres, high-density areas that have lots of travel connections, are both, high priority targets for a 5G network, but also it's where coronavirus is likely to go. So there's some overlap in that respect, but it's really not significant, not as significant as it would be if this was true. But let me just make this point. 5G is what? It's electromagnetic waves, radio waves, which is in the really low part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The allegation is that that causes health concerns. But here's the thing. The known health concern from electromagnetic waves for a very, very long time has been cancer and tumours. And higher up the spectrum, more risky for cancer and tumours. Lower down the spectrum, less risky. To suddenly say, well, it's actually spreading a biological agent, a virus that causes respiratory disease, I don't know what's going on there. That's a weird jump sideways. Look, if there is a health concern from 5G, it's going to be cancer. Now, it's actually in that part of the spectrum down low, below UV light, which is the lowest part of the spectrum that is known to be able to cause cancer. That's, the sun can cause cancer. It's got UV in it as well as visible light, which is higher up. But lower down than that, not really. And there's a bit of a jump before you get to the radio waves that are used in 5G. So it's pretty safe. Now, maybe one day they'll find out they were wrong about that. But if they were wrong, it'll be because it has a cancer-causing potential, okay? It won't be because it causes respiratory disease, which is strange. Third, the Bill Gates theory. This is the idea that Bill Gates plans to use the virus as an opportunity to roll out mandatory vaccination, potentially including a microchip, because that's what he's always wanted to do. Now, look, Bill Gates got his problems. Don't take me as, being Bill Gates' biggest fanboy. And yes, he is keen on vaccines, although I don't think in light of the work that he's been doing for a while, that's so crazy, because he is dealing with infectious diseases. And look, vaccines, there's context in which vaccines have been very good at dealing with infectious diseases. And so, look, it's true, he would like more vaccination. And yes, he is investing in technology, along with others and other organisations, that can inject not a microchip, but microparticles, which are able to be detected when scanned or light shone on them or whatever to show that someone has been vaccinated. Now, is that a worrying technology? Well, it could be. I mean, I haven't looked into it enough, except that's not the point. The point is this. The notion that global enforced rollout of microchip vaccines could be suddenly achieved with great effect is unrealistic. Entire populations would rebel. Think of many Americans with their firearms. Governments are not unified like that. Governments are fighting with each other and in opposition with each other all over the world. Some would say no, some would say yes. It just wouldn't work. They don't get on. Or there's the third world, which is just not adequately served with bare necessities. And there's teeming millions of people there. And Gates hasn't managed to reach them all with basic healthcare, let alone 7 billion vaccines to cover the entire world. How would that be manufactured? Where would it come from? What would be the logistical infrastructure required to get that done? What about the international and national cooperation required to get that done? What about the personnel required to put that together? That would be something that's never been done before, never been achieved before. The resources, your head kind of blows up when you even try and imagine it. It's not feasible. Now, that said, is it possible that one day nearly everyone on the planet will be required by law to be vaccinated one day? Perhaps. Perhaps, yeah. One day. That's actually potential. Is it possible that one day there'll be multinational rollout of microchip implants for some reason? One day, perhaps, maybe, among a gazillion other different possibilities. Is it possible that one day we will tear down 5G towers because we discover that they can cause an unacceptably high number of malignant cancers? Seems unlikely, but look, all right, one day, maybe, perhaps. And that's the reality. And this is the point. The fears at play here are actually classic fears. Fears being the key word, because they're speculative. They are maybe somehow in the future type fears. They rely on a lot of hypotheticals. They rely on a level of seamless global infrastructure that doesn't exist. They rely on these very, very hypothetical situations. And I think it's fair to say many of those hypothetical future scenarios which are stoking people's concerns have some kind of nexus with, some kind of connection with people's eschatology, their view of the end times. And I think we can far too quickly forget something in that regard. The book of Revelation, you see, it was not written to provoke speculation. It was not written to agitate people. It was not written to make people fearful about what could maybe perhaps be in the future because of a new technology that might one day possibly perhaps develop into something bad. Living on tenterhooks is not the point. In fact, the whole point of Revelation, the reason it was written, it's such a great book, by the way, I've been studying it, the reason it was written is precisely the opposite. John wrote it to churches who were in the fire of persecution, facing martyrdom for their faith, living with daily and present and well-founded fears, terrified of the chaos in their world. He wrote it not to make it all worse, not to fill them with speculation and concern and fears about what's coming. He wrote it to encourage them. He wrote it to strengthen them, to bless them, and to give them peace in troubled times and concerning the future. Why? How? How would that be the case? Because it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. Read verse 1. The great revealing of the fact that Jesus is Lord and He is King, and what happens will happen in His good time and in His planning, and none of it will happen apart from His care of His people. Why? That's why there's a throne in heaven in chapter 4. That's why He holds the scroll of world history in His hand and is rightfully able to open it in chapter 5. That's why He's the ruler of the kings on earth in chapter 1, and He's seen directing all things through thick and thin in His sovereign power as what? Lord. What did Peter say on Pentecost? He said, God has made this same Jesus who you crucified both Lord and Christ. And this is the revelation of that reality. And it's there, words like mark of the beast or phrases like that aren't there to make us anxious. They're not there to fill us with concern. They're there to fill us with confidence in the living God because it's written down beforehand. He knows the way things are. He knows what will happen, and He's in full control. And if everyone will one day be injected with a microchip, well, you ain't going to stop it. But you can have a great deal of confidence in the fact that it won't happen, apart from God letting it happen, and He hasn't forgotten about His children. Not to mention, I think every generation has at some point become preoccupied with speculation about the end, and they invariably get it wrong. So save yourself the nervous energy. Understand that it will happen with or without it will happen with or without you in God's good time. And take some advice from Jesus in the very first chapter. What happens when John falls at His feet? He puts his hand on him and he says, Fear not, for I am alive forevermore. And if you're getting knocked off course or getting concerned or getting really worried about speculations in this time of trouble, really take heart. That's why Revelation was written. Fear not, because he is alive forevermore and he is Lord. Hey, one more thing. I've been looking at the metrics and I figured out something. You guys are watching the videos and not subscribing. So please help us out a great deal by hitting the like button and then hitting subscribe, hitting the bell as well so you get the notifications. It helps us out a really great deal, and you can click here to see more videos.